Hi guys and welcome to KeebWorks. Today I'll be reviewing the first generation Razer BlackWidow and the Cherry MX Blue Switch because frankly I haven't done a keyboard and switch review for quite some time. Anyway, let's get started. Now as I mentioned, this is the first generation BlackWidow, which was sold all the way back in 2010 alongside the more expensive BlackWidow Ultimate, which they do still to this day, but they now call it the BlackWidow Elite. If you're wondering what the differences are between this and the Ultimate had blue backlighting, a thicker braided cable, an audio port and a USB port on the right side, but it was almost twice the price, and I think this was the better deal in my opinion. For switches, it uses Cherry MX Blue. This was before they used Razer green switches, which they now still use in both new BlackWidow models. But I still don't know why they went ahead with this switch in particular, as it's not very suitable for gaming. I'll explain what I mean in the switch categories. Now, let's move on to the keyboard categories. Starting with build quality, and this thing is absolutely solid, weighing in just under 1.4 kilograms, which is very impressive for a gaming keyboard. They also went with a glossy design, which they don't do anymore, thank goodness. But there are 4 things I don't like. Number 1, the thin and flimsy braided cable. The Corsair K70 RGB I reviewed a while back had a much thicker braided cable. Number 2, the keycaps. They are thin and pad printed, which is one of the worst printing methods out there because you can feel the legends as you type along, which I personally dislike. Number 3, the bottom row. It's not standard as you can see, and I don't like this as it makes it hard to put custom keycaps on it. So I don't see why manufacturers do this. And lastly, at number 4, the screws that hold the keyboard are under the rubber pads that prevent the keyboard from slipping. But this is the only way to access the keyboard if you want to look inside without damaging the keyboard. And once you do it enough times, the rubber pads lose their stickiness and they won't stick to the keyboard anymore. It's a terrible design choice in my opinion because my keyboard now slides everywhere and I don't like that. But with that said, it's a very well built keyboard and I'd give it an 8 out of 10. It's a very, very good score. Now with feature set, there's a lot to talk about, and one of the more notable aspects are the 5 macro keys on the left side. This was not a common modern keyboard design choice, especially in the early days of mechanical gaming keyboards, so I'm glad this is a feature on the base model of the board. Another notable feature are the integrated media controls on the F keys. And yes, all of them work absolutely perfectly. Additional features included a gaming lock, which is now standard in many keyboards of today, an LED brightness adjuster, and a computer sleep function. And by the way, the LED brightness adjuster is for the blue LED light logo on the bottom of the keyboard. Now for the weird features, starting with the keycap legends. They are the ugliest legends I have ever seen on a keyboard. I mean, just take a look at the B key, or the R key, or the Q key. Just, who even made these? I mean, Razer did, but come on, this is the design choice they went with? This is absolutely garbage. Another weird feature are the stabilizers. Razer opted to use Costa-like stabilizers instead of the more commonly used Cherry stabilizers. This is presumably to cut down on costs, but I think this is really weird to see on such a high-end keyboard. For the next weird features, take a look at the F keys. They are shifted to the right, meaning there is more space between the escape key and the F1 key, but there is less space between the F keys themselves, and I don't know why they did this, but it's such an odd choice. So finally, for the last weird feature, in order to record or use the macro keys, you need the Razer Synapse software running in the background. But as soon as you close it, none of the macro keys can be used or recorded to anymore. It's weird, but I suppose there's a technical limitation I'm not understanding. So that was a lot of features, but there are a couple of them missing, and a few of them are weird here and there. Still, it gets a 7 out of 10, which is really good for a decade-old keyboard. For daily performance, it's quite bad overall for several reasons. The main reason is the fact that if you need to use or record macros, you need to have the software open in the background, which takes up resources that could potentially hurt your FPS when gaming, especially if you don't have a powerful PC. The second reason is the switch. This is not what I would recommend for any serious gamers. Cherry MX Blue is suited more for typists than it is to gamers. This is because the Switch has hysteresis, which we all know is not ideal in any gaming environment. The third and fourth reason is ghosting and key chatter. So it's also not suitable for typists either. I'll give more details on that on the next section. But for daily performance, it gets a 4 out of 10. Okay, so I mentioned ghosting and key chatter on the previous section. Let me explain. Ghosting is when a key is registered but not pressed by the user. Key chatter is when a key registers multiple times even though the key was only pressed once. Both these issues become super annoying when typing, and especially more annoying when entering passwords because you don't see the words on your screen. But it hasn't affected me in gaming in any way at all. The keys that chatter on this board are the E key, the B key, the N key, and the full stop key. However, I still wouldn't recommend buying this keyboard if you're looking for something reliable. I would give this a 2 out of 10 in reliability, as I think the chattering and the ghosting will become worse in a few years. Now for value, I bought this keyboard for £15, which is a stunning deal. But these usually go for between £20 to £30 in the used market, depending on the condition. And I think if you can get it for under £25, it's definitely worth getting. Otherwise, just get a Chinese clone board with Altima Blue switches for not that much more money. Plus, those are brand new, and this is a decade old. So I'd say a 5 out of 10. It's close to a 6, but that only applies if you get it as cheap as I did. Now, moving on to the switch categories. Starting with smoothness, and it's very scratchy off center, but it's only mildly scratchy when pressed on center, and you only really notice when you press slowly. The Costa stabilizers perform identically to the Cherry stabilizers, which surprised me, by the way. It's a 4 out of 10, but this could be due to the fact that I have it in a fairly old board, and I'll have to do a retest again in the future to see if they get any higher than that. Weighting isn't too bad actually. It has a peak tactile bump at 1.8mm with a 67 gram of force. I just don't like the super lightweight of the pre-travel, which there are lots of, but the weighting after the tactile bump is actually quite nicely weighted in my opinion. It's a 5 out of 10, but a heavier spring would bump it up to a 7 or an 8. Perhaps Cherry MX Green is the answer here. Now, as a clicky switch, sound is a very important aspect. These, however, are just decent. They sound terrible and ear-piercing on this board, but they're usually lower pitched in other chassis. It gets a 6 out of 10. Now, prepare your ears for the typing demo. Enjoy. Typing performance was difficult to judge, as it is a good switch for typing. I did enjoy typing on this for the most part. It's actually one of my favorite cherry clicky switches as well, but the ear-piercing nature of this chassis makes it almost unbearable to use over long periods. However, you can just wear headphones, turn up the volume, and the switch shouldn't be an issue anymore. But that sort of defeats the point of buying a clicky switch. It's a 6 out of 10 with headphones on, and a 5 out of 10 without headphones on, but I'm going to put a 6 in the chart since it's closer to that than a 5. Gaming performance is bad if the game you're playing requires you to double, triple, or quadruple tap every time, like in most FPS and MOBA games. Then this is not it. It's not suitable for that at all. However, if you're a casual player, then you might not even notice any of that. It might probably be fine, but I would still stay away from it. The biggest reason is because there are now switches specially designed for gaming in mind. 10 years ago, when this came out, I probably would have recommended it, but not anymore. It gets a 4 out of 10. So in conclusion, it's not a bad keyboard for the right price. But you have to remember that it's a decade old, and I feel that a Chinese clone board will serve you more reliably for basically a similar price point, if not for a bit more. The final score is 27 out of 50 or 54%, placing it right between the GK61 and the Corsair K70 RGB. The final score for the Switch is 25 out of 50, right in the middle, but second to last in my overall Switch ranking. Next week, I'll be reviewing another Razer keyboard with another clicky switch. I think you know which one that is by now. Until then, take care and goodbye.